Every evening, Mark, a young delivery driver, rushed through the busy streets. She struck packed with packages, but one fateful night a stray dog appeared in his path, a scruffy, hungry creature with pleading eyes, unable to ignore the pup's desperation. Mark made a decision that would change everything when his act of kindness reached his boss's ears. Mark was fired on the spot, but just minutes later, something shocking happened that left everyone speechless. What could possibly turn Mark's worst day into a moment of unforgettable redemption? Mark had always been a man of simple pleasures. His days were spent driving his rusty delivery truck through the bustling city, weaving through narrow alleys and dodging impatient drivers. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. She worked long hours, barely making ends meet, but found comfort in the rhythm of his routine. However, it was his evening delivery route that brought a small spark of joy to his otherwise monotonous life. The quiet streets and the orange glow off the setting sun made it his favorite time of day. One evening, while making his last round, Mark spotted a stray dog curled up near a dumpster in a quiet alley. The dog was skinny, its ribs showing through its patchy fur, and its eyes were filled with a mix of fear and hunger. Mark slowed his truck, his heart itching for the poor creature. He had seen stray animals before, but there was something about this dog, an unspoken plea in its eyes, that he couldn't ignore. Mark pulled over and rummaged through his lunchbox. He only had half a sandwich left, but without hesitation, he tore it in half again and crouched down, extending the food to the dog. The animal hesitated, its nose twitching as it cautiously approached. Mark spoke softly, "It's okay, buddy. I won't hurt you." Slowly, the dog inched closer and took the food, devouring it in seconds. For a brief moment, its tail wagged, and Mark felt a flicker of connection. The next evening, the dog was there again, waiting in the same spot. Mark had anticipated the and had brought an extra sandwich over the next few days. This routine became a small but meaningful part of his life. The dog, who Mark began calling Buddy, seemed to grow more trusting with each visit. Mark even started bringing water and small treats when he could spare them, but not everyone saw this as a gesture. Mark's boss, Miss Colwell, was a man known for his strictness and lack of patience. When Coldwell found out about Mark's stops to feed the stray during work hours, she was livid. "We're not running a charity here." He bellowed in the office one morning, "Your job is to deliver packages, not play zookeeper." Mark tried to explain, "It's just a few minutes, sir. I'm not neglecting my duties. That dog, he's starving." "I don't care about your stories." Caldwell snapped one more time, and York felt the sting of his boss's words, but couldn't bring himself to abandon Buddy that evening. Had decided to take the risk. As she handed Buddy another sandwich, a neighbor snapped a picture and shared it online, writing, "This man feeds a stray dog every night while on his delivery route. Kindness isn't dead." The post quickly gained traction, but Mark had no idea of the storm it would unleash the following day. Mark went about his deliveries as usual, unaware that his small act of kindness had already begun to ripple far beyond the quiet alley. As she loaded packages into his truck, he noticed his co-workers whispering and glancing at him. Shrugging it off, he focused on his route, determined to finish on time and keep his promise to Buddy. By the time evening arrived, Mark was back in the alleys, in which in hand Buddy greeted him with a wagging tail, a far cry from the cautious dog he had first encountered. As Mark crouched to pet him, he heard an unfamiliar voice behind him. "You're the delivery guy from that photo, right?" Mark turned to see a young woman holding her phone. Here, Yez were filled with curiosity and excitement. She showed him the viral post, now shared thousands of times with captions like "Every day hero spotted, and this is what kindness looks like." Mark's cheeks flushed. "I didn't do it for attention," he mumbled, just couldn't leave him starving. The woman smiled. "Well, people are noticing. Keep it up," Marted politely, unsure how to respond. As the woman walked away, he glanced at Buddy scratching behind the dog's ears. "Looks like you're famous." Now, we joked, but deep down he worried. Attention like this could complicate things, especially if Colwell found out. The next morning, Mark arrived at work only to be summoned to the manager's office. Colwell sat behind his desk. His face storm cloud of anger. A print out of the viral post lay on the desks. "So this is what you've been doing on my time." Coldwell spat, pointing at the image. Mark stood his ground. "It takes 2 minutes. Sir, it doesn't affect my deliveries." Caldwell slammed his fist on the desk. "I warned you, Mark. You're fired. Pack your things." The word shit like a punch to the gut. Fired for feeding a stray dog. Mark felt his chest tighten with anger and disbelief. "You're really letting me go for this?" Hesked, his voice trembling. "Rules are rules," Coldwell said coldly, "and now get out." Defeated, Mark returned his uniform and left the office with a heavy heart. They had no idea how he would pay his bills or keep his apartment. His only solace was knowing he hadn't abandoned Buddy that evening. Mark went to see Buddy, a usual event, though he no longer had a job to drive to. He brought the last of his savings in dog food and sat beside the stray, sharing the quiet companionship that had become so important to him. Ash is at the rear car. Pulled up Mark's surprise. The young woman from the previous night stepped out holding a small camera crew into Mark. Writes his head smiling warmly. My name's Emily Iruna, local news blog, and I'd love to share your story. Mark hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea. I just lost my job. Because of this, Emily's expression softened, all the more reason to tell it. People need to see that doing the right thing sometimes comes at a cost. Mark said, glancing at Buddy. After a moment, he nodded. Okay, let's do it. Emily's interview aired that night, showcasing Mark's bond with Buddy and his willingness to risk his job for an act of kindness. The story went viral, almost instantly flooding social media with messages of support. Donations began pouring in, and strangers offered Mark everything from groceries to job leads. But the biggest shock came the following day. As Mark was scrolling through his phone, he saw a message from a local animal shelter. They were offering to help Buddy, providing medical care and finding him a home. And then there was the twist Mark never expected. Coldwell's name was trending online. Outraged viewers had uncovered his role in firing Mark, and his business was being inundated with bad reviews and angry comments. By the end of the day, Coldwell's company issued a public apology and offered Mark his job back, though Mark wasn't sure he wanted it. Mark's story continued to gain momentum, reaching people far beyond his small-town. Donations from supportive strangers were enough to buy Buddy proper food and cover his medical checkup. The dog was healthier than Mark had expected, aside from being malnourished, but showed no signs of serious illness. The vet even noted his gentle demeanor, remarking, he's lucky to have found you. Mark couldn't help but feel proud, but his joy wasting ed with uncertainty. He still hadn't decided whether to return to his old job after Coldwell's half-hearted apology, despite the outpouring of support online. Mark couldn't shake the anger he felt toward his former boss. The next day, Mark received an unexpected phone call too. It was from Emily, the blogger who had interviewed him. Her voice was brimming with excitement. Mark, you just got a call from someone who saw your story. It's someone big. Mark furrowed his brow. What do you mean? Oh, you know, the Peterson Foundation? Emily asked. They're one of the largest animal rescue organizations in the country. Their directors all your story and wants to meet you. Mark's heart skipped a beat. The Peterson Foundation was well known for their efforts in rescuing and rehoming animals worldwide. He'd seen their work featured in documentaries and dreamed of being part of something like that, but why would they want to meet him? Are you sure they've got the right person? Marcus hesitantly. Emily laughed. Trust me, they know who you are. I've already arranged a meeting for you tomorrow morning at their local office. The next morning, Mark arrived at the Peterson Foundation offices, still unsure what to expect. Their reception area was bustling with activity, volunteers organizing supplies, phones ringing, and the faint sound of barking from the kennels. Out back, a cheerful woman greeted him. You must be Mark, she said, extending her hand. Anna Peterson, the foundation's director. Mark shook her hand, still feeling slightly out of place. It's nice to meet you. I'm not sure why I'm here, though. Anna smiled warmly. You're here because you embody everything. West stand for compassion, selflessness, and a belief that every animal deserves a chance. Your story moved Deuce, and we'd like to offer you a position here at the foundation. Mark blinked, stunned. A position doing what? We'd like you to join our outreach team, Anna explained. You'd be helping us connect with communities, raise awareness about stray animals, and organize rescue efforts. Of course, we'd also love for Buddy to be part of our team as an ambassador. Mark glanced at Buddy, who was wagging his tail happily beside him. I don't know what to say. Mark stammered. This is incredible, but don't have any formal experience. Anna's smile widened. Experience can be learned. Compassion, like your scant web, believe in you. Mark, by the time Mark left the meeting, his mind was spinning. The offer was more than just a job. It was a chance to turn his passion for helping to a career, but it also meant stepping into an entirely new world, one that came with its own challenges and uncertainties. As she walked back to his car, Buddy trotting happily beside him, Mark couldn't help but think of how far they had come since their first meeting in the alley. The stray dog he had fed out of sheer kindness had not only changed his life, but opened doors she never imagined possible. Mark spent the rest of the day processing Anna Peterson's offer. He felt excitement, but also a weight of responsibility. Could hear Ollie step into a role at the Peterson Foundation and make a difference on such a large scale. His life had always been simpler, revolving around work and modest rodents. This new opportunity felt like a leap into the unknown. He spread out the paperwork Anna had given him on the kitchen table, the job description highlighted in bold letters. Buddy lay at his feet, his tail thumping lazily against the floor. Mark glanced down at him and smiled. What do you think? Buddy asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. Think I've got what it takes. Buddy yawned in response, but Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of affirmation in the dog's relaxed demeanor. He pulled out his phone and called Emily to share the news. Emily, they offered me job, he said, still sounding amazed. I knew they would, Emily replied enthusiastically. This is exactly the kind of opportunity you deserve. Mark, so are you going to take it? Mark hesitated. I'm not sure it's a big change, what if mess it up? Emily's tone softened. Mark, you've already proven that you have the heart for this. The rest can be learned. Besides, think about how many animals you could help. Isn't that worth the risk, Mark? Nevin. Though Emily couldn't see him, you're right. I'll sleep on it, but I think I know what I have to do the next morning. Mark called Anna to accept the offer. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. That's wonderful news. Mark, we're thrilled to have you join the team. Let's set up your orientation and get you started after hanging up. Mark felt a mix of excitement and nerves. The decision was made, but he still had to face one final hurdle. Telling Caldwell Heck knew his former boss had only apologized because of the backlash, and the thought of explaining his departure filled him with dread. Mark decided to get it over with and headed to the delivery center. Coldwell was in his office, shuffling through paperwork, as when Mark knocked on the door. Mark, Coldwell said, his tone guarded. What brings you here? I wanted to let you know I won't be coming back. Mark said firmly, I've accepted a position with the Peterson Foundation. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. The animal people you're really going to throw away. Steady job for that. Mark straightened his posture. It's not just that it's a chance to do something meaningful, to help animals like Buddy who don't have anyone else. I appreciate the opportunity I had here, but this is what I meant to do, Caldwell snorted. Suit yourself. Just remember, note, everyone gets second chances. Don't come crawling back. If it doesn't work out, Mark held his ground. I won't need to, but thanks for the warning with that. Mark left the office for the first time in years. He was stepping away from stability and embracing uncertainty. Yet it felt right. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Mark attended training sessions at the foundation, learning about animal care, community outreach, and the logistics of organizing rescue operations. Ashen's Buddy quickly be favored among the staff, his friendly demeanor and wagging tail earning smiles wherever he went. Mark's confidence grew. With each passing day, he began to see himself not as an outsider, but as someone who could genuinely contribute to the foundation's mission. His first official task was to assist with a local adoption event where he and Buddy would greet visitors and share stories of the animals available for adoption. The day of the event arrived and Mark stood at the entrance of the park. Buddy, by his side, families and animal lovers flooded the area, browsing the adoption booths and chatting with volunteers. Buddy was a natural ambassador, drawing people in with his gentle nature. Mark's heart swelled with pride as she watched a young girl kneel to pet Buddy here, yes, lighting up as she asked about his story. Buddy used to be a stray, Mark explained, but now he's part of a family, and today we're hoping to help other animals find their forever homes. The girl's mother smiled. Thank you for what you're doing. It's inspiring to see someone making such a difference. As the day went, and Mark realized he had found his calling. The event was a resounding success, with dozens of animals adopted, and countless donations raised. Mark and Buddy were at the heart of it all, their bonds serving as a testament to the power of compassion. As Mark packed up the booth at the end of the day, Anna approached him. You did an incredible job today. Mark, she said, you've got a real talent for connecting with people. Mark smiled. Child, it's easy when you believe in what you're doing. Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think this is just the beginning for you, Mark. You and Buddy are going to great things. Mark settled into his new role at the Peterson Foundation with growing confidence. Buddy became the unofficial mascot of their efforts, bringing joy and warmth to every event. The duo's story of resilience and second chances resonated deeply, attracting attention from the local community and event theme media. However, as fulfilling his new job was, it also came with challenges. Mark hadn't anticipated the foundation's mission to rescue and rehome animals wasn't just about heartwarming success. Stories it often involved dealing with heartbreaking realities. One chilly morning, Mark arrived at the shelter to find Anna waiting for him with a concerned look. Mark, we've got a situation, she said. A local warehouse has been abandoned, and we've received reports of several stray dogs trapped inside. The neighbors say they've been hearing working for days. Mark's stomach tightened. How many dogs are we talking about? Anna shrugged. We don't know. The city has given us permission to access the property, but we'll need to act fast. It's cold, and the conditions inside are likely rough. Buddy, sensing the urgency, wagged his tail and barked softly as if to say, we've got this. Their rescue team, including Mark, Buddy, and a few experienced volunteers, arrived at the warehouse later that morning. The building was in a state of disrepair, its windows boarded up and the walls covered in graffiti. A faint but distinct chorus of barking echoed from within Mark's heart. Act at the thought of the frightened animals inside. Let Hundu. This is said, his voice is steady but determined. The team split into pairs, equipped with flashlights, leashes, and crates. Inside, the air was damp and musty, the floor littered with debris. Mark and Buddy led the way, Guided by the sound of whimpering, they found the first dog huddled in a corner, a small terrier mix trembling with fear. Mark crouched low, speaking softly. As Buddy approached cautiously, the terrier's ears perked up at Buddy's presence, and after a few tense moments, she allowed Mark to slip a leash over her neck. On by one, the team located the other dogs. Most were malnourished and skittish. Their trusting humans clearly shaken. Buddy played a crucial role, acting as a calming presence that helped their fears. By the end of the operation, they had rescued 7 dogs into one, a heart-breaking reminder of the harsh realities some animals face back at the shelter. The team worked tirelessly to care for the rescued dogs. Mark stayed late, helping to bathe and feed them. He couldn't help but notice one particular dog, a large brindled mastiff with soulful eyes who refused to eat or interact with anyone. "Hey there, Buddy," Mark said, gently kneeling by the mastiff's crate. "It's okay. Now you're safe." The dog stared back at him, his gaze heavy with mistrust. Mark sighed, knowing it would take time to build a bond. As the days turned into weeks, the mastiff, whom Mark named Titan, remained withdrawn while the other dogs began to recover and show signs of trust. Titan seemed stuck in his fear. Mark made it his personal mission to help Titan heal, spending extra time sitting near his crate and speaking in soothing tones on evening. After weeks of patient effort, Titan finally took a tentative step toward Mark. It was a small victory, but one that filled Mark with hope. Back at the shelter, the team worked tirelessly to care for the rescued dogs. Mark stayed late, helping to bathe and feed them. He couldn't help but notice one particular dog, a large brindled mastiff with soulful eyes who refused to eat or interact with anyone. "Hey there, Buddy," Mark said, gently kneeling by the mastiff's crate. "It's okay. Now you're safe." The dog stared back at him, his gaze heavy with mistrust. Mark sighed, knowing it would take time to build a bond. As the days turned into weeks, the mastiff, whom Mark named Titan, remained withdrawn while the other dogs began to recover and show signs of trust. Titan seemed stuck in his fear. Mark made it this personal mission to help Titan heal, spending extra time sitting near his crate and speaking in soothing tones on evening. After weeks of patient effort, Titan finally took a tentative step toward Mark. It was a small victory, but one that filled Mark with hope. As the shelter thrived under its newfound attention, Mark saw how much the work was making a difference. Titan slowly began to open up, wagging his tail for the first time during a play session with Buddy. The other rescued dogs found loving homes, their transformations a testament to the power of compassion and patience. Mark's journey was far from over, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges he faced only strengthened his resolve, reminding him why he had taken this path in the first place. Mark's dedication to the shelter became a defining feature of his life. Every day brought new challenges and triumphs, but as the work grew, so did the emotional weight. Despite delegating some responsibilities, Mark found himself grappling with dilemmas that tested his resolve. One rainy evening, Mark received a call from a woman named Clara. She had heard about the shelter's efforts and wanted to surrender her dog, Max, a 7-year-old golden retriever. Clara's voice trembled as she explained her situation. "I love Max, but my health is failing and I can't take care of him anymore," she said, her words heavy with guilt. "He's my best friend, and I don't want them to feel abandoned, but I have no choice." Mark's heart ached for Clara. He assured her they would take Max in and find him a loving home the next morning. Clara arrived at the shelter, her face itched with sorrow. She clutched Max's leash tightly, her hands trembling as she knelt to hug him one last time. "I'm so sorry, boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I hope you'll understand one day." Mark approached gently. "We take good care of him, Clara, I promise." Clara nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you. He's a wonderful dog. He deserves a good life." As she left, Mark felt a lump in his throat. He glanced at Maxon, who sat by the door, his eyes fixed on the spot where Clara had disappeared. The dog let out a soft whine, his tail drooping. Mark crouched down to Max's level. "Hey, buddy, I know it's hard, but we're going to make sure you're okay over the next few days." Max's sadness was palpable. He barely ate and spent most of his time in his kennel, his head resting on his paws. Mark tried everything to lift his spirits: long walks, special treats, even introducing him to Buddy, but nothing seemed to help. On afternoon, while cleaning the kennels, Mark overheard 2 volunteers discussing Max. "Poor guy," one of them said. "It's like he's given up." Mark paused, their words hitting him hard. He couldn't stand the thought of Max feeling so hopeless. That night, he sat in Max's kennel, talking to him in a soothing voice. "I know you miss her," Mark said, "and it's okay to be sad, but she did this because she loves you. She wanted you to have a chance at a better life." Max's ears twitched at Mark's voice, and he lifted his head slightly. It was a small response, but it gave Mark hope. While the shelter faced another challenge, a local developer had announced plans to build a shopping complex near the shelter, raising concerns about noise and pollution. Anna called an emergency meeting to discuss the potential impact and strategies to address it. If this development could seriously affect our animals, Anna said, her resolute, "We need to make our voice heard." Mark volunteered to lead the effort, rallying the community to support the shelter. He organized a petition drive, spoke at town hall meetings, and Devonist social media to spread awareness. Buddy of 10 accompanied him, serving as a lovable mascot for their cause. The fight against the development brought out the best and worst in people. While many rallied behind the shelter, others dismissed their concerns as overblown. Mark encountered hostility at one meeting where a developer representative scoffed at their arguments. "You're running an animal shelter, not a hospital." Thiemann said dismissively, "It's not like this is a matter of life and death." Mark's temper flared, but it kept this composure to these animals. "It is a matter of life and death." He replied, "They can't speak for themselves, so have to, and we won't stop until they're protected." As the weeks passed, Mark's determination paid off. The community's support grew, with local businesses and residents joining their cause. The shelter's social media posts went viral, drawing attention from national organizations. 7 Clara Adispit, her declining health, wrote a heartfelt letter to the city council urging them to protect the shelter. Stirred during this time, Max began to show signs of improvement. He started eating more regularly and even wagged his tail. When Mark brought him his favorite toy, Buddy played a significant role, nudging Max to join him during playtime and offering quiet companionship during difficult moments. One evening, as Mark sat in the shelter's officer reviewing their petition results, Max walked over and rested his head on Mark's lap. It was a simple gesture, but it brought tears to Mark's eyes. "You're going to be okay, Max," Mark said, stroking his fur. "We're all going to be okay." The shelter's efforts culminated in a public hearing where Mark delivered a passionate speech about the importance of their work. Has shared stories of animals like Buddy, and Max emphasizing the transformative power of compassion. The hearing ended with an unanimous decision to impose restrictions on the development, ensuring the shelter's safety. The victory was celebrated with cheers and hugs, but for Mark the greatest reward was seeing Max wag his tail. And thus, I asked Ollie for the first time since arriving at the shelter. Mark's journey at the shelter had taught them many lessons, but the most profound was the resilience of both animals and people. Despite the challenges and emotional toll, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The victory over the proposed development gave the shelter a much-needed boost in morale. Donations poured in from supporters who had followed their story online, and new volunteers signed up to help. While it seemed like things were finally settling into a positive rhythm, but life at the shelter had a way of throwing curveballs, and Mark was about to face a new challenge, one he never saw coming. It started with a call from a named Roger who claimed to be the owner of Buddy. His voice was curt, most accusatory, as she described a golden retriever he had lost months ago. "I saw a picture of that dog on your social media. Roger said that's my dog and I want them back." Mark was stunned. Buddy had been found as a stray and had shown no signs of belonging to anyone. No collar, no microchip, no reports filed. The idea that someone might claim him after all this time felt like a punch to the gut. "I'll need proof of ownership," Mark said, firmly trying to mask his unease. "But he's been with us 4 months, and we want to ensure he's placed in the right hands." Roger grumbled, but took him by the shelter with documentation. As Mark hung up, a sense of dread crept in. The thought of losing Buddy, who had become the heart and soul of the shelter, was unbearable. The next morning, Roger arrived at the shelter, a scowl etched across his face. He was a tall, wiry man with a sharp gaze that made Mark instantly wary. In his hand, he held a stack of papers and an old photograph of a golden retriever that bore a striking resemblance to Buddy. "This is him," Roger said, pointing to the photo. "He went missing after a storm knocked down our fence. I've been looking for him." Ever since Mark studied the photograph, the dog in the picture did look like Buddy, but something about Roger's demeanor didn't sit right with him. Buddy had thrived at the shelter, exuding joy and affection, qualities that seemed at odds with the tension radiating from Roger. "Does Buddy respond to his old name?" Mark is trying to probe further. Roger hesitated. "He used to. I called him Max," nodded slowly, noticing that Buddy lounging nearby showed no reaction to the name Max. "Come here." Mark called, testing the claim. Buddy didn't budge, instead wagging his tail lazily at the sound of Mark's voice. Roger bristled. "Maybe he's just out of practice. It's been a while." Mark decided to stall for time. "We need to verify these documents and check with local records," she said, keeping his tone neutral. "If everything checks out, we'll discuss the next steps." Roger's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine. Just don't take too long." After Roger left, Mark gathered his team to discuss the situation, and ever the voice of reasons suggested running Buddy's photo through lost pet databases to cross-check Roger claims. Meanwhile, the volunteers shared Mark's unease about returning Buddy to someone who didn't seem genuinely caring. What if he wasn't a good owner? One volunteer asked, "Buddy's so happy here. It doesn't make sense for him to have run away unless something was wrong." Mark agreed, but he knew they had to handle the matter carefully. If Roger's claim was to deny him his dog no matter how unsettling his demeanor. Days turned into a week as Mark awaited the results of the database search in the meantime. Roger's calls grew more frequent and demanding. He accused Mark of stalling, threatening to take legal action if Buddy wasn't returned. Mark confided in Anna, who shared his concerns. Something doesn't add up, she said. If he all he cared about Buddy, why would he wait this long to search shelters? And why isn't Buddy responding to him? The situation came to a head when Roger showed up and announced his frustration boiling over. "I'm not leaving without my dog," Hess howled his voice, echoing through the shelter. Buddy, sensing the tension, barked protectively as Mark stepped to calm the situation. "Roger, I understand you're upset," Mark said evenly, "but we have protocols to follow. If your claim is legitimate, we'll resolve this properly." Roger glared at Mark, his fists clenched. "You better hope I don't find out you're lying about this," has gnarled before storming out that night. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. He decided to dig deeper out to contacts at local shelters and rescues. Son of the mallman named Linda called him back with startling news. "Roger has a history," Linda said, her tone grave. "He's been reported for neglect in the past. One of the dogs she owned ended up in our care, and it was clear he wasn't taking proper care of it." Mark's blood ran cold. He immediately documented the information and prepared to escalate the matter. Roger, history of neglect was true. There was now but would go back to him the next morning. Mark contacted a local animal welfare lawyer explaining the situation and sharing Linda's report. The lawyer assured Mark they had grounds to contest Roger's claim given the evidence of neglect and Buddy's apparent lack of recognition. As Mark hung up the phone, Buddy trotted over and nuzzled his legs, sensing his unease. Mark knelt down, hugging the dog tightly. "Don't worry, Buddy," he murmured. "I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe." The legal process began. Townfold Mark felt a mix of determination and anxiety, while the lawyer assured him they had a strong case. Roger's aggression and persistence made the situation nerve-wracking. Mark knew that the fight wasn't just for Buddy. It was for every stray and abandoned dog who deserved better than the likes of Roger. The shelter staff rallied around Murrin, with Anna spearheading an awareness campaign. To garner public support, they shared Buddy's story on social media, highlighting his transformation from a timid stray to a beloved part of the shelter. Their response was overwhelming. Comments poured in from supporters who urged them to protect Buddy at all costs. "Buddy is better off with you," one supporter wrote. "Don't let him go back to someone who doesn't truly care for him." The campaign caught the attention of a local news station, which reached out for an interview. Mark hesitated at first, worried about stirring the pot, but Anna convinced him it was an opportunity to shine a light on the plight of neglected animals. "This isn't just about Buddy," Anna said here. "It's about showing people what's at stake when we don't stand up for these dogs." During the interview, Mark shared Buddy's journey from being a scared stray to becoming the shelter's mascot. They spoke passionately about the importance of responsible pet ownership and the need to hold people accountable for neglect. As the segment aired that evening, Mark received messages of encouragement from the community. Even people who had never donated to the shelter before reached out offering financial support or inquiring about volunteering. Roger, however, was less than pleased. The next day, he stormed into the shelter, his face red with fury. "You're paying me the bad guy," he shouted. "This is defamation." Mark stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. "We never mentioned your name, Roger. We simply advocating for Buddy's well-being. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about." Roger glared at Mark but didn't respond. Instead, it turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Behind the scenes, Mark continued digging into Roger's past with Linda's help. He compiled evidence of Roger's history with other animals, including photos and vet reports from cases where dogs had been removed from his care. The evidence painted a grim picture of a man who seemed more interested in possessing dogs than caring for them. The lawyer filed a formal objection to Roger's claims, citing the evidence of neglect. They also included a statement from a behavioral expert who had observed Buddy at the shelter and noted his apparent lack of recognition toward Roger. "This dog shows no signs of having a bond with Mr. Roger," the expert wrote. "His behavior suggests she has not been in Mr. Roger's care for an extended period, a fatal as the case progressed." Mark noticed a shift in Buddy's behavior. The normally cheerful dog became more subdued as if sensing the tension in the air, he stuck close to Mark, often curling up at his feet. During late nights at the shelter one evening, as Mark worked on paperwork, Buddy let out a soft whine and placed his paw on Mark's lap. Mark looked down and saw the worry in the dog's eyes. "It's okay, boy," Mark said, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "I won't let anything happen to you." Amidst the legal battle, a surprising ally emerged. A woman, Carol, reached out to the shelter, claiming she had once been Roger's neighbor. She had seen the news segment and felt compelled to speak up. "I used to live next door to Roger," Carol explained during a phone call. "Hadn't treat this dog's well. They were always tied up outside no matter the weather, and he barely fed them. Carol agreed to provide a sworn statement. Adding another layer of credibility to their case, her testimony, combined with the other evidence, gave Mark renewed hope. The shelter staff threw themselves into their work, using the heightened attention to advocate for other animals in need. They organized adoption events, fundraisers, and educational workshops, all while keeping an eye on the looming court date. Buddy became a symbol of resilience, his story inspiring people to take action. Volunteers decorated the shelter with signs that read, "Buddy's fight is every dog's fight," and justice for Buddy. As the court date approached, Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about winning a case, it was about proving that every dog deserved a second chance and a loving home. The night before the hearing, Mark sat with Buddy in the quiet shelter, has stroked the dog's fur, his thoughts swirling. "No matter what happens tomorrow," Mark said softly, "you can always be part of this family. We won't let you down." But looked up at them, his tail wagging slightly as if to say he understood. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the air was thick with tension. Mark dressed in his best suit, his nerves frayed, but his determination unwavering. Asha clipped Buddy's leash to his collar. The dog looked up at him with trusting eyes. "You ready, boy?" Mosked, his voice trembling slightly, but he wagged his tail, his demeanor calm, despite the looming confrontation at the courthouse. The atmosphere was tense. Supporters of the shelter had gathered outside holding signs that Buddy and protect the innocent. Mark felt a surge of gratitude for the community that had rallied behind them. He exchanged a nod with Anna, who was flanked by a group of volunteers wearing matching shirts. Emblazoned with Buddy's picture inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Rogers sat at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer by his side. He glared at Mark, his expression a mix of anger and smugness. Mark took a deep breath and steadied himself, focusing on the case they had meticulously prepared. The judge entered, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes that scanned the room. After the formalities, she called the proceedings to order. Rogers' lawyer began by arguing that Buddy had been Rogers' property and that Mark had no right to interfere. Had painted a picture of a well-meaning owner who had temporarily lost this dog due to unfortunate circumstances. Mark's lawyer countered by presenting the evidence. They had gathered photos of Buddy's malnourished state. The testimony of the behavioral expert and Carol's sworn statement were all laid out for the court. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Roger claims. When it was Mark's turn to speak, has stood up, his heart pounding. "Your Honor," he began, "Buddy is not just a dog, he's a living being who deserves compassion and care." When Buddy came to, she was starving, scared, and in desperate need of help. "We've given him a second chance at life, and I believe returning him to Mr. Roger would undo all the progress he's made." Mark glanced at Buddy, who sat calmly by his side, and felt a wave of resolve wash over him. "This isn't just about Buddy," he continued. "It's about setting a precedent that disposable property. They are companions, friends, and family." As Mark spoke, the judge's expressions of tense slightly, though she remained composed. When Roger was called to testify, his demeanor was defensive and erratic. Under cross-examination, he contradicted himself multiple times, struggling to explain why Buddy had been found in such poor condition. The pivotal moment came when Carol was called to the stand. Her testimony was clear and damning. "I've seen how Roger treats his dogs," she said firmly. "They're left outside of 10 without food or water. Buddy was just another neglected animal to him." Roger's lawyer attempted to discredit her, but Carol's calm and consistent answers made her a compelling witness. The final piece of evidence came in the form of a video. One of the shelter's volunteers had captured footage of Buddy's transformation during his time at the shelter. The video showed Buddy arriving at the shelter emaciated and scared, and then cut a clips of him thriving under their care. The courtroom Wassel Entis. The video played, the emotional weight of Buddy's journey evident to all. When the video ended, the judge called for a brief recess to review the evidence. Mark sat down, his hands trembling slightly. Anna leaned over and whispered, "You did great. No matter what happens, you fought for Buddy." As they waited for the judge to return, Mark glanced at Roger, who was hunched over, his face red with frustration. Buddy, on the other hand, rested his head on Mark's knee, radiating calmness. When the judge entered the courtroom, everyone stood, the room falling into an anxious silence. She took her seat and began to speak, her tone measured. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony from both sides, it is clear that Buddy's best interests have not been served by Mr. Roger. The evidence presented by the shelter demonstrates a pattern of neglect that cannot be ignored." Mark held his breath. As the judge continued, "I hereby grant full custody of Buddy to the shelter, with the stipulation that he remains in their care or is adopted into a suitable home." Relief flooded through Mark as the judge's decisions. Anna clapped a hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, while the supporters outside erupted in cheers. When the news reached them, Rogers slammed his fists on the table, muttering angrily under his breath. As the courtroom emptied, Mark knelt down and hugged Buddy tightly. "With it, boy," he whisked. Buddy licked Mark's face, his tail wagging furiously. Later, as they exited the courthouse, the crowd outside erupted into applause. Mark held Buddy's leash tightly, smiling, as people reached out to pet the dog who had become a symbol of hope and resilience. "Buddy's story doesn't end here," Mark said, addressing the crowd. "This is just the beginning. Let's keep fighting for every animal that needs a second chance." That evening, the shelter was filled with a buzz of celebration. Volunteers gathered in the main room, where balloons and a "Welcome Home Buddy" banner hung from the ceiling. Mark, wave of relief and joy, stood at the center of the crowd, Buddy sitting proudly at this side. "You're a hero, Buddy," Mark said, ruffling the dog's ears. Buddy wagged enthusiastically, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Anna clinked a glass to gather everyone's attention. "I just want to say," as she began, her voice wavering with emotion, "that this victory is not just for Buddy, but for every animal we fought to protect. Mark, you've shown us what it means to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it gets." The room erupted in applause, and Mark's face flushed with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. Buddy's story is proof that compassion and perseverance can change lives. As the celebration continued, Mark watched Buddy weave through the crowd, his tail wagging as people offered treats and belly rubs. The transformation from the terrified stray who first wandered into Mark's life to the confident and beloved dog had become was nothing short of remarkable. Later, as the party wound down, Anna approached Mark with a soft smile. "Have you thought about what's next for Buddy?" Mark hesitated, his gaze drifting to the dog curled up by the fireplace. "I think he's already found his home," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Here with me." Anna's smile widened. "I had a feeling you'd say that." The following day, Mark prepared Buddy's adoption paperwork, feeling a sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced in years. As she signed his name on the final line, Buddy lay at his feet, chewing a Nask Iki toy Anna had given him as a victory gift. "Looks like you're officially my partner now," Mark said, scratching Buddy's head. The dog looked up, his tail thumping against the floor in response. Word of Buddy's story spread quickly, and the shelter continued to receive an outpouring of support. Donations came in from across the community, enabling the team to expand their efforts and rescue even more animals in need. Inspired by Buddy's journeys, several families visited the shelter to adopt their dogs, giving them the chance they deserved. But Buddy's story wasn't just a local phenomenon. A journalist who had covered the court case pitched the story to a national news outlet, and soon Buddy's tale of resilience and justice was making headlines across the country. The shelter's social media pages were flooded with messages of support, and people from all lovers shared their own stories of rescuing animals in need. One messages to doubt to Mark: "Thank you for fighting for Buddy. Your story reminded me why I adopted my dog Max, who was also a stray. Keep doing what you're doing. It's making a difference." Mark shared the message with Anna, who beamed with pride. "See," she said, "Buddy isn't just changing lives he's inspiring people everywhere." In the weeks that followed, Buddy adjusted to life as Mark's official companion. He accompanied Mark one ran curled up beside him during late-night shifts at the shelter, and even greeted visitors with a wagging tail and a friendly bark. His presence became a source of comfort and joy for everyone who crossed paths with him. One evening, as Mark and Buddy walked through the park, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Mark reflected on the journey they had been through. The court battle, the stress, and the uncertainty had all been worth it to give the life he deserved. As they sat on a bench overlooking the pond, Buddy rested his head on Mark's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. Mark stroked the dog's fur, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You know, Buddy," Mark said softly, "you've taught me so much about resilience, about love, and about standing up for what matters. I thought I was rescuing you, but maybe you rescued me too." Buddy's tail wagged lazily, his way of agreeing with Mark's words. At the shelter, Buddy's victory continued to inspire change. The team launched a new initiative called Buddy's Legacy, aimed at advocating for stricter animal welfare laws and providing resources for P-towners in need. The program became a beacon of hope, further cementing Buddy's impact on the community. Months later, during a town event, Mark was invited to speak about Buddy's story. Standing on stage with Buddy by his side, Mark addressed the crowd. "This dog," he said, gesturing to Buddy, "is more than just ape. There's a symbol of what happens when we choose kindness over indifference, action over apathy. Every animal deserves a chance, and it's up to us to give it to them." The crowd erupted in applause, and Mark felt as well of pride as she looked down at Buddy, who wagged his tail as if to soak in the moment. That night, as Mark and Buddy returned home, the stars shining brightly above, Mark knew that their journey wasn't over. Together, they would continue to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, spreading a message of hope, compassion, and resilience. As the media coverage of Buddy's story gained traction, the community's outcry against the cruel Policies of Mark's former employer reached a boiling point. People rallied outside the fast food chain headquarters holding signs that read "Justice for Buddy" and "Compassion over Profits." Local animal rights organizations joined the movement, amplifying the voices demanding accountability. Mario, initially overwhelmed by the sudden attention, was pulled into the fray as our reluctant spokesperson Anna encouraged him to use the platform to advocate for lasting change. "This is bigger than Buddy. Now," she said, "you have a chance to ensure no one else faces the same." In justice one afternoon, Mark received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line was a high-ranking executive from the fast food chain. Her tenue was professional but strained. "Ms. Reynolds, we'd like to meet with you to discuss this matter privately," she said. Mark's grip on the phone tightened. "Privately, after everything you've done to me and Buddy. Now you want to sweep it under the rug." The executive hesitated. "We willing to offer compensation. Fourth, damages caused. We believe this situation can be resolved amicably." Mark's heart raced. The thought of financial relief was tempting. He was still struggling to make ends meet after losing his job, but the faces of the protesters outside the headquarters flashed in his mind. This wasn't just about him. It was about a systemic issue that needed to be addressed. "I'm not interested in a payout," Mark said firmly. "What I want's a commitment to changing your policies, starting with how you treat your employees and the animals in your care." The executive sighed. "Mr. Reynolds, I'll bring this to our board of directors, but I can't promise anything you do." That Mark replied, hanging up. His resolve only grew stronger. This fight wasn't over. Later that day, Mark attended a community meeting at the shelters. Supporters filled the room sharing stories of their own experiences with unfair treatment and animal cruelty. A young woman tearfully recounted how she'd been fired for rescuing a stray kitten from a dangerous parking lot. Their words resonated deeply with Mark, fueling his determination to see the movement through. "We need to keep the pressure on." Mark told the group, "This isn't just about one dog run person, it's about standing up for what's right." Later that day, Mark attended a community meeting at the shelters. Supporters filled the room sharing stories of their own experiences with unfair treatment and animal cruelty. A young woman tearfully recounted how she'd been fired for rescuing a stray kitten from a dangerous parking lot. Their words resonated deeply with Mark, fueling his determination to see the movement through. "We need to keep the pressure on." Mark told the group, "This isn't just about one dog or one person, it's about standing up for what's right." Later that day, Mark attended a community meeting at the shelters. Supporters filled the room sharing stories of their own experiences with unfair treatment and animal cruelty. A young woman tearfully recounted how she'd been fired for rescuing a stray kitten from a dangerous parking lot. Their words resonated deeply with Mark, fueling his determination to see the movement through. "We need to keep the pressure on." Mark told the group, "This isn't just about one dog or one person, it's about standing up for what's right." While Mark prepared for another meeting of his own, this time an attorney representing the fast food chain reached out to discuss potential reforms. The email invitation came with vague promises, but no guarantees. Anna, sitting across from Mark at their kitchen table, read the email aloud. "They want you to drop your public advocacy in exchange for a monetary settlement." Anna said, her voice laced with skepticism. "They're not offering any concrete policy changes." Mark's jaw clenched. "It's not enough. Buddy deserved better. And so do the other workers and animals who've been overlooked. They're just trying to shut me up." Anna nodded. "Then let's make sure they hear us louder than ever." The next morning, Mark arrived at the law office. Fourth, the meeting, Buddy trotting faithfully by his side. To his surprise, the company wasn't alone. Several senior executives, including the CEO, had decided to attend in person. The air in the room was thick with tension as the two sides sat across from each other. The CEO, a middle-aged man with a carefully neutral expression, broke the silence. "Miss Reynolds, we've reviewed your case and acknowledged that mistakes were made. We're here to make things right." Mark leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. "If you think this is just about me, you're missing the point. What happened to me and Buddy is part of a much bigger problem. People and animals deserve to be treated with respect, not as disposable inconveniences." The CEO nodded slowly. "We understand that now, which is why we're considering revising our policies." Mark narrowed his eyes. "Considering isn't good enough. I want to see a written commitment to change, one that includes protections for employees and humane treatment. Policies for animals, for ours." The two sides debated specifics. Mark held his ground, refusing to be swayed by vague promises or financial incentives. She presented detailed proposals for policy reforms, drawing on input from the community and animal welfare experts. His passion and persistence caught the executives off guard. By the end of the meeting, the CEO extended a hand. "Miss Reynolds, we're willing to take your recommendations to the board for a vote, but in return, we'd like you to publicly acknowledge our efforts to make amends." Mark hesitated, glancing down at Buddy had thought of the countless people and animals who would benefit from these changes. Finally, he shook the CEO's hand. "I'll support this if the changes are real," and lasting words mean nothing without action. Outside the office, a crowd of supporters and reporters waited eagerly for Mark's update as she stepped out with Buddy. At this side, the cheers of the crowd filled the air, cameras flashed, and reporters bombarded him with questions. Mark raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Today we took an important step forward. The company has agreed to review and implement policies that prioritize fairness and compassion. But this isn't the end. It's only the beginning. We'll hold them accountable every step of the way." The crowd erupted into applause, and Mark felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just about his fight anymore. It was about everyone who believed in doing what was right. The day of the board meeting arrived. This was the moment the fast food chain would decide whether to adopt the sweeping changes Mark had demanded or retreating to damage control. The outcome would determine not only Mark's future, but the lives of countless workers and animals impacted by the company's policies. The day of the board meeting arrived. This was the moment the fast food chain would decide whether to adopt the sweeping changes Mark had demanded or retreat into damage control. The outcome would determine not only Mark's future, but the lives of workers and animals impacted by the company's policies. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere west and set. The directors, representing a wide range of opinions and interests, debated fiercely. Some argued that implementing Mark's proposals was the right thing to do both morally and strategically. Others worried about the cost and potential backlash from shareholders. The CEO, who had been swayed by Mark's passion during their earlier meeting, rose to speak. "We're at a crossroads. We can choose to cling to outdated practices and risk losing the trust of our customers, or we can lead by example and show the world that we stand for something greater than profit." His words hung in the air. Finally, the chairperson called for a vote inside the boardroom. The atmosphere set. The directors, and representing a wide range of opinions and interests, debated fiercely. Some argued that implementing Mark's proposals was the right thing to do, both morally and strategically. Others worried about the cost and potential backlash from shareholders. The CEO, who had been swayed by Mark's passion during their earlier meeting, rose to speak. "We're at a crossroads. We can choose to cling to outdated practices and losing the trust of our customers, so we can lead by example and show the world that we'd for something greater than profit." His words hung in the air. Finally, the chairperson called for a vote. Mark stepped onto a makeshift stage that had been set up outside. The crowd fell silent. Hasha raised the microphone. "I have incredible news," he began. His voice is steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "The board has voted to approve their reform we've been fighting for. This company has committed to policies that protect its workers, respect its customers, and treat animals with compassion." The crowd erupted in cheers. People hugged, clapped, and waved their signs triumphantly. Buddy barked as if joining in the celebration. Mark held up a hand to quiet the crowd. "This victory isn't just mine. Ours. It's proof that when we stand together, we can create real change. Let this bear reminder." As the celebration continued, Mark felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The fight had been long and exhausting, but it had been worth every moment. Looking down at Buddy, who wagged his tail enthusiastically, Mark smiled. This little dog had sparked a movement, showing the world that compassion could change lives. The wave of celebration outside the company headquarters was electric, but the true test of change lay ahead for Mark. The victory wasn't just about policy reforms. It was about ensuring the promises made. That day turned into real actions. A week later, Mark received an unexpected invitation. The company's CEO wanted him to join a newly formed advisory panel. The panel's mission would be to oversee the implementation of their reforms and ensure accountability at every level. It was an opportunity Mark couldn't ignore, event though it meant stepping into a world far outside his comfort zone. As Mark walked into the sleek conference room for the panel's inaugural meeting, Buddy trotted beside him, his paws clicking softly against the polished floors. The other panel members, executives, animal welfare experts, and workers' rights advocates, were already seated, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Mark took at the tables, all firm. "Let's get started." The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mark and the panel reviewed every facet of the company's operations, from sourcing practices to employee training programs. They uncovered troubling issues, but also found opportunities for meaningful improvement. One of the panel's first victories was the establishment of a fund to support employees facing financial hardship. This fund, financed by voluntary pay cuts from top executives, became a lifeline for workers struggling to make ends meet. Mark also worked with the company to partner with local animal shelters, providing resources and raising awareness about animal adoption. Buddy became the unofficial mascot of the initiative, appearing in promotion materials and even accompanying Mark to community events. His story continued to inspire people, reminding them of the power of simple acts of kindness. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Some employees were skeptical of the reforms, fearing they were merely a PR stunt. Mark knew that earning their trust would take time and consistent effort. One afternoon, Mark visited the fast food location where he had once worked. It was surreal to step back into the familiar space. But this time, as a guest rather than an employee, the new manager greeted him warmly and introduced him to the staff. As Mark spoke to the workers, sharing his story and the changes he had fought for, he saw the skepticism in their eyes begin to the end of the visit. The young employee approached him hesitantly. "Thank you for what you've done," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "It means a lot to know someone's looking out for us." Mark smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "You're the reason I keep fighting," he said. "Don't ever forget how important you are." As their forms gained traction, public perception of the company began to shift. Customers who had boycotted the chain returned, encouraged by the transparency and accountability the company now demonstrated. Media outlets highlighted the company's transformation, calling it a blueprint for ethical business practices. Mark's journey came full circle when he was invited to speak at a national conference on corporate responsibility. Standing on the stage in front of hundreds of business leaders, she shared his story, how an act of kindness toward a stray dog had set them on a path and never could have imagined. Kindness isn't just a feeling, Mark said, his voice resonating through the auditorium. It's a choice we make every day. It's the foundation of trust, the spark for change, and the bridge that connects us. If a single stray dog can inspire a movement, imagine what we can achieve together. The audience rose to their feet. Applause echoing through the hall. Mark looked out at the sea of faces, feeling a profound sense of hope. The world wasn't perfect, but it was worth fighting for. Mark stood on the stage. The thunderous applause was hing over him like a wave. For a moment, he allowed himself to take in the enormity of it all. The journey from a humble delivery driver dismissed for a single act of compassion to a symbol of kindness-driven change. As she looked out at the audience he realized this wasn't just his story. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of doing the right thing, no matter the cost. After the conference, Mark returned to his hometown, where he found Buddy waiting at the front door, tail wagging furiously. Buddy had become more than just a companion. He was a symbol of hope and resilience. Every time Mark looked at them, he was reminded of the ripple effect a single act of kindness could create. Their reforms implemented at the fast food chain had continued to take root, transforming the company culture. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements, and workers felt empowered to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. Community outreach programs blossomed, with locals reporting an increase in adoptions thanks to the company's campaigns. Buddy's face became a well-known symbol in these efforts, representing second chances for both animals and people. Mark's life changed in other ways as well. The connections he had made during his advocacy work opened new doors, and he began collaborating with organizations focused on workers' rights and animal welfare. Had traveled to schools and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging others to stand up for what they believed in. Despite his growing platform, Mark remained grounded. He continued to volunteer at the local animal shelters, spending time with dogs that reminded him of Buddy, hopeful, resilient, and eager to find a home. When asked why he still found time to volunteer, his busy schedule, Mark's answer was simple: it's where it all started. The story of Mark and Buddy resonated far beyond their small-town. Social media was flooded with messages from people inspired by their journey, many sharing their own acts of kindness. Hashtags like Dariskin Ness Matters and Bis Buddy Effect trended, sparking conversations about how small gestures could lead to profound change. Mark received countless letters and messages from people whose lives had been touched by his story. One letter from a former employee of the fast food chain stood out. The writer thanked Mark for giving workers like her a voice and shared how the company's changes had allowed her to pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. Your kindness didn't just save a dog, the letter read, it saved people like Matuus. These seasons changed. Mark reflected on the lessons she had learned. He realized that kindness wasn't about grand gestures or recognition. It was about showing up for others, when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. It was about seeing the humanity in people and the potential in moments others might overlook. Buddy, now a little older and a little slower, remained by his side. Through it all, their bond was a testament to the power of love and loyalty. And every day, Mark was grateful for the twist-off fate that had brought them together. One crisp autumn evening, as Mark and Buddy walked through the park, a young boy approached them. "Is that Buddy?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Mark nodded, smiling, as the boy crouched down to pet the dog. "He's famous," the boy said. "My mom told me his story. She said he's there as I got my puppy." Mark's heart swelled. "Well, but he's a special dog," he said, scratching the dog's head. "But don't forget, kindness can come from anyone, even youth." The boy beamed, and as she and his mother walked away, Mark felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He hadn't just changed his own life. He had started a ripple that was still spreading that night as Mark sat on his porch with. Buddy by his side had gazed up at the stars, had thought about the unexpected twists and turns his life had taken, and the people who had joined him along the way. Most of all thought about the power of a single momentum moment when he chose compassion over convenience, and how that choice had changed everything. Not bad for a stray dog. Buddy, Mark said, his voice tinged with emotion. Buddy wagged his tail, resting his head on Mark's lascif to say, "Wedded together," and in the quiet of that night, Mark knew that while his story with Buddy had started with a simple act of kindness, it would never truly end. It would live on in every act of compassion inspired by their journey, proving that the smallest gestures could change the world. If this story inspired you, remember that the smallest act of kindness can make a difference, whether it's helping a stray animal, standing up for someone, or simply spreading positivity. Your actions have the power to create change. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories like this, and be sure to watch our next video.